University. He is the author of 4 books, including Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City, which won the Pulitzer Prize. In 2016, Matthew was listed among the Politico 50 as one of 50 people across the country who are most influencing the national political debate. Matthew is the principal investigator of the Eviction Lab, focusing on poverty in America, city life, housing insecurity, public policy, racial inequality, and ethnography. We are so happy to welcome you back to Politics for the People to talk about your new book, Poverty by America.
Hey, Cathy, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, our pleasure. And thank you so much for this book, such a chilling portrait of the inhumane costs of the levels of poverty in the United States, and a provocative and urgent call to all of us. One of the things that you write in the book that has stayed with me, and in fact, I think should haunt us all, is this very simple sentence where you write, poverty is an injury, a taking.
Yeah.
And you talk about how poverty in the United States looks different and is more severe than in other advanced democracies and comparable economies. And I wanted to ask you to kick us off by talking about what that looks like and why that is the case.
Well, it's an honor to be back. It's good to see you post-pandemic. Thank you so much for having me. And I think, when we talk about America and what makes us different as a country, I think there are a lot of wonderful things that make us different and stand out as a country. But there are other things too. And we really do stand out with respect to our poverty rate. If you look at our child poverty rate, the percentage of kids below the poverty line in America, it's not just more than Germany or South Korea, it's double. It's double. So we have double the rate. And we have about 38 million Americans living below the official poverty line. If they all formed a country, that country would be bigger than Australia or Venezuela. 1 in 3 of us live in homes making $55,000 or less. Many of those folks aren't officially counted as poor, but what else do you call it? Living in Portland or Austin, Texas, trying to raise 2 young kids on $55K. So there's an incredible amount of economic insecurity in America that sets us apart from other advanced democracies, especially with respect to the amount of riches in this land of dollars. And you asked why. And I think in a nutshell, the answer is because we like it in a way. We benefit from it. Now, there's pains to this, and I think poverty encroaches on all of us in a way, and it's a threat to all of us, even those of us very secure in our money. But I think at the end of the day, we have to face the cold, hard fact that many of us benefit from poverty, unwittingly, sometimes wittingly, and that this book is trying to get us to realize that, and it's trying to get us to take action to unwind ourselves, to divest from our neighbor's suffering.
Right. I think that's so important, that term, to divest. Yeah. Well, here's a follow-up, I think, that begins to get at that. In the book, you outline very crisply how our public policies prioritize the subsidization of wealth over the alleviation of poverty. And you take apart the idea of the welfare state and what it really looks like, making the point that it heavily favors the upper classes. And there were a lot of things about that I had never thought about or realized.
Yeah.
So could you paint a little bit of that picture for us, kind of the top items that you think average Americans need to understand?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing we need to understand is that poverty isn't inevitable. We don't have to live with it. I think the biggest myth about poverty in America is that it's just going to always be here. The poor will always be with us, as Jesus said. And I think that, gosh, there's a lot fewer poor folks in countries with a lot less money than we have. And I think that so the inevitability, our high tolerance for poverty, is a myth. We do not have to live with all this destitution in our country and all this kind of public disinvestment that we've embraced. I'm really glad you brought up this imbalanced welfare state. That was a big learning curve for me too, and kind of digging into the data and looking into all the government research. Because when we think of what the government does for people, we often think about welfare as food stamps as housing assistance, and those are really important. It's also Social Security, right? But it's also tax breaks. And tax breaks literally are designed for us to not think about them as benefits. When tax season comes along, we think about what we have to pay. We don't think about what we don't. And our brains are literally wired this way. Psychologists have shown that if I lose $1,000, the pain of that loss is greater than if I somehow find $1,000 or win $1,000 in the lottery. And so, but if you think about it for a little bit, a tax break puts money in my pocket. A tax break costs the government money, and a tax break incentivizes some behavior like saving for college or owning a home. And so we have to include those tax breaks as part of what the government does. And every year we spend about $1.8 trillion on tax breaks. So that's double military spending. That's a huge amount of the welfare state. And if you look at those tax breaks, those welfare benefits, those social insurance, basically everything the government does for us, you learn that, our poorest families in the bottom 20% of the income distribution, they get about $25,000, $26,000 a year from the government on average every year. But our richest families, the families in the top 20%, they get about $35,000 from the government every year. That's a 40% difference. And so this is how we give the most to families that need it the least. And for me, the bottom line for this is like, we hear every day from our elected officials, our neighbors, we can't afford to do more. We can't afford to give everyone a doctor. We can't afford to give anyone more public housing, affordable housing. And it's just such a deceitful, even sinful response to poverty. We could afford it if the richest among us took less from the government.
Yeah, so important to come to terms with that. It's almost like we need to change what's important to us as a nation. This has to become far more important so we can break through all of that. I was very struck in the book when you write about the COVID crisis and how there were a number of programs that were instituted that actually worked, that helped blunt the economic impact of the pandemic and help the poor. And could you talk about what those were in particular that really impacted on our poorest citizens, and some of the lessons learned and what went well, and then where'd that all go?
Yeah. There's so much to be said here, but I think when the history books are written about the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of chapters on the fact that with respect to poverty reduction, this was the biggest thing the federal government has done for the poorest families in America since the War on Poverty in 1964. It's incredible to think about how bad things were and how worse they could have been and why they weren't because of government intervention. At the height of the 2008 crisis, there were about 600,000 files for unemployment in the worst week of the Great Recession. In the worst week of the pandemic recession, there were 3 million. It was such an economic catastrophe. After the Great Recession, it took us about 10 years for families in the bottom 50% of the income distribution, middle class, working class, poor families, to regain their income. 10 years. After COVID, it took them about a year and a half. It was night and day. And we made these massive reductions in poverty. Reductions. So we cut the child poverty rate by 46% in 6 months with one simple program. It was the extended child tax credit, which is basically, the way to think about it is basically it's kind of guaranteed basic income for middle, working class, and poor families with kids. That's how to think about it. Congress signed the law in March, checks went out in June, and this massive reduction in child poverty. Evictions plummeted to lowest rates on record because of other programs that really bailed renters out. And so you asked about the lessons that we take home, and I take home three big lessons. One is government aid works. It works. And, Reagan had this incredibly catchy line, we fought the war on poverty and poverty won. That's empirically false. And we see the enormous good that government can do when it really flexes and really tries. The second thing we learned is getting the money out the door quickly really matters. So, one of the things we learned wasn't just about the amount of investment in the American people, but like the design, and so it wasn't like Obamacare, right? Where it's like it started and then it was like super confusing and you went to a website and they just got it out. They got the help out. And I think that's a big lesson for how we design our programs. And then the third lesson is something I'm still grappling with and I'm still trying to come to terms with, because so we did all this, good. For a moment there, we had a different country. Like we had a better country, actually. And then we just let it go away. We let it disappear. And there's easy answers for why that happened. It was an emergency, but the country's changed in other emergencies. After World War II, that was an emergency too, and the country fundamentally changed. We had a hard Democratic senator. We couldn't get past this one guy, but that's kind of there's these deeper questions about why we who might care about poverty let that expire. Like, why weren't we in the streets? Why weren't we blowing up our congressperson's phone? And that's something that I think we need to start grappling with at the moral level as a country.
Well, let me ask you to talk a little bit. That leads me to want to delve into the concept of being a poverty abolitionist. And I'm going to quote again from the book, Matthew, that you say, ending poverty in America will require new policies and renewed political movements, but it will also require that each of us in our own way become poverty abolitionists, unwinding ourselves from our neighbors' deprivation and refusing to live as unwitting enemies of the poor. And wow, we could spend hours talking about that. And many of us on the call today, as I think you know, have been working for many years as part of the independent political reform movement, trying to create a democratic process where the American people have more power, feel that they have more power, and do have more power, and working to bring that 45% of Americans now who are leaving the parties back to the table more fully. So this is like a double question here. How do you think about the level of dysfunction in the country, political dysfunction, the erosion of our democratic process, and how that prevents us from making the investments, even having the right conversations to truly make poverty top of the priority list? And that said, how do you view Americans becoming poverty abolitionists in that context?
Yeah. I think one of the things that the polarization at the topmost level does, and I think that qualification at the topmost level is really important, because on the ground level, there's a lot of overlap with respect to economic justice. A lot of us, we're not going to agree on everything, but most Americans think the minimum wage is way too low. Most Americans think the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. They're right. Most Americans think that poverty is a result of structural obstacles, not a moral failing. So with respect to these basic issues, there's not polarization, actually. There's widespread economic agreement. But in Washington, there is. And one of the things that happens because of that is the kind of anti-poverty establishment, the kind of lobby for affordable housing or labor, they're really just trying to protect what they have. They'll say, we've got housing vouchers, we need a bit more of them. We've got labor law, let's make it a little stronger. I agree with all that. And it's hard for me as a professor to look, anyone in the trenches fighting with at Washington has my respect and love, but it also leads to a bit of scared intellectual capture because of the polarization, because there really is another party that's trying to take it away. And so I think that part of my job as a writer is to try to expand the Overton window, is try to push against that. Yes, this is important, but we have to go further. And I think polarization is something that we have to fight through. I also think we can't use it as an excuse. It's very absolving. If only we got a majority, if only this. It's no one waited in the past, right? Our movement foremothers and forefathers didn't wait for Congress to get its act together before they pushed. They pushed. And sometimes they lost and sometimes they won. And we still have to push no matter what it looks like. I think, in Washington. Now, you asked, the second question was like, what's this poverty abolitionism? What's it mean? What are the stakes? And what this is ultimately is me saying, I've been to a million different conferences and I've had a million different conversations in Washington, and people will say this, well, we know what to do and we have the money, but there's not the political will. And so this is my answer. Here's one way to build the political will. Poverty abolitionism means you, me, everyone on this call takes this as part of our identity. I'm a poverty abolitionist, which means I act a little differently than if I wasn't. I shop a little differently. I invest a little differently. I know, a lot of us know, right, that if we're going to signal like we're this kind of political person, we drink this kind of coffee and we wear this kind of shoes and we have this kind of backpack. And but we have no idea what the baristas are getting paid, what the shoemaker's getting paid, right? We should. And so a poverty abolitionist extends her commitment to economic justice with their wallet. We vote with our wallet. We also fight for a rebalanced welfare state. We oppose exploitation, even if we benefit from it. And we are anti-segregationists. We fight for broad, inclusive communities. Now, that might sound vague, but that means like I'm going down to the zoning board meeting on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, and I'm standing up and saying, look, I want other kids to benefit from the things that this community offers my kids. We got to build this thing here. So the idea of like a policy change, of course we need policy change, but like that doesn't happen without these little everyday ways that we can change the common sense. I think we've seen this in other movements. So like environmentalism, right? Like we've got some big act of Congress now. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act, right? I don't see that happening if a lot of us were like, I'm going to change the kind of car I drive. I'm going to stop eating meat, or I'm going to eat less meat. I'm going to take a few more flights. That stuff changes the common sense. And so I think that really matters on this level too. So we're not going to solve climate change by hang drying our laundry, but it matters. And we're not going to solve poverty by only shopping union-made products, but it matters. And I think that poverty abolitionism is that call for us to start taking personal responsibility for this problem, which kind of invites this larger conversation. And some of these things are hard and annoying and even painful. And in that difficulty, we realize our complicity, right? We realize how we're connected. And I think that's a good start.
Thanks, Matthew. We're gonna turn to all of our folks from around the country now. Just a reminder, if you have a question and you haven't put it in the chat yet, please do put your name, your state, and just an overview of your question. We're gonna go to Mary Fridley first. Mary, are you there from Brooklyn? You're gonna have to unmute yourself. I see Lou Hinman, but I was looking for Mary Fridley.
Actually, I'm here, but I think it's Lou who has the question.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
nice to see you, Mary. Lou, do you have a question? I think you have to unmute yourself, Lou.
Okay. Am I unmuted now?
You are fine, Lou. Go ahead.
Okay. I do have a question, and actually another one just occurred to me. But the first one is I wanted to, first of all, thank you, Matthew, for being here with us and for your book. I read some of the reviews that were posted on the Politics for the People website. In particular, the one by the Washington Examiner and the one by the City Journal. And I think, especially with the Washington Examiner, I felt like I questioned whether he read the same book that I did. But I wanted to ask you what if you have a sense of what the response has been. I know you're on the Times bestseller list, and that's a good sign. But do you have some idea of what the what the response at the book review level has been as a whole around the country?
I guess I care less about book reviews than I care about the response from audiences that I'm meeting.
Okay.
I haven't read the Washington Examiner review, for example. But I think that the book has generated a bigger response than I anticipated. And I feel encouraged by that. I feel a mandate from that. I feel that a lot of people are receptive to, I don't know, some of the hard medicine that the book offers, and kind of want something different, right? And are open to something different. I think one of the challenges I'm facing, and this is a challenge that I'm facing in the US, but also overseas, like in Europe, it's kind of a global challenge, or at least a Western challenge, is folks will say, all right, I'm down for this, but what about whatever, what about Congress, or what about capitalism? What about vested interests, corporate lobbies, corporate lawyers? And again, those obstacles are very real, but I feel that a focus on them sometimes leads us to hopelessness, and our hopelessness is useless, right? It's useless to families getting evicted today, not being able to feed their kids enough, not being able to meet medical needs. So I think that there's been a bigger reception from the American public than I expected. But I also think that one of the challenges is trying to break through the sense of hopelessness and almost like an in vogue pessimism that I sense in America, which can be a very conservative emotion, I feel. It's not unearned, but if we want real ends, I think we got to break through it. So.
Thanks, Lou. I'm so glad to hear you talk about the response from audiences. That's so important. And I think that hopelessness is being organized.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I really do. I think that the political status quo, our political culture decidedly wants people to feel hopeless and therefore not act. That's a lot my sense as an activist. And there's so much power in people coming together and taking the steps that can be taken and then seeing where that leads. So I really appreciate what you're saying there. Let's go to Harry Kresge in upstate New York. Harry, are you there?
I am here. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for being here, and thank you for your book and all the work you've been doing. My question is somewhat abstract, but I think it's not unimportant or uninteresting. And I was going to ask you how you understand the relationship between economic inequality and economic equality of opportunity. So,
yeah. I think that it's a really important question. I think that if the country really put its money where its mouth is when it comes to economic opportunity, it would require radical change, right? Just radical policy change. And I think that the language of economic opportunity is often used to support the status quo. But if we took that really seriously, I think we'd be in a much better place. So a lot of times conservatives will say, we don't want equality of outcomes, we want equality of opportunities. I would be totally down for that. I'd be totally supportive of that. And this book, in a way, it doesn't address inequality as much as you might think. There's been a ton of books since the Occupy movement about inequality. And I guess my read of that literature is often it's about the middle class and the rich. We are the 99%. It's about the very upper class often. And gosh, that's an important conversation. But I also, again, I often feel like if we're always going to point the finger to the guy that's like just a little richer than us, then it does let us off the hook. And this book didn't want to let us off the hook. And this book is really about ending poverty. It's really about, like, seriously taking the idea that no one should fall below a certain level in America. And in that America, it's a lot safer, it's a lot healthier, it's a lot happier, but there's still plenty of inequality to wrestle with, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Harry, for that question. Let's see. I think we can do this. I'd love to bring Steve Huff and Dr. Jesse Fields together to you each are posing a question that I think is very similar. So maybe we could get both your questions on the table to Matthew.
Steve, you want to go first?
Sure, Jesse. Likewise, Matthew, thank you for the book and spurring this conversation and spending some time with us today. I just wanted to point out that I was not surprised that several of the readers in our book club, the quote from Saru about how the pundits and the politician would have us believe that we think so differently and that we're so polarized is, largely BS. And you've addressed this a little bit already. We have a diverse universe of citizens that, live and work together peacefully, and they have more in common than the politicians and the pundits give us credit for. And in a previous book selection, we learned about the political industrial complex and how there's a network of gain-seeking individuals and entities that, have over time designed the election system to reinforce the status quo. And so, given this reality, I was just wondering if you're familiar with the new election system which Alaska has adopted, and if so, what do you think the potential is for having a real impact on poverty and other challenging issues, especially since earlier you mentioned that government programs play a big role in reducing poverty.
Should I?
Yeah, Jess, let's add yours to the mix.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I like everyone else, really love the book. Thank you so much. One of the things that really moved me, I'm a physician in the Harlem community, and I thought that the way that you spoke about differences in poverty in the Black community and the Hispanic community, among Native Americans, white poverty, they're very different. And my experience, I felt that you really captured what I feel and see in seeing patients with medical problems who are poor, and the sort of, the complexity and interrelationships. And in your writing, you talk about slavery and how slavery embedded a harsher form of capitalism in the United States, and that shaped our political institutions, our economic systems. And one of the things I just wanted to ask you about is it seems to me that it's a structural necessity for poor people of color, and poor people in general to play a leadership role in the fight against poverty. And that I work in the poor community around particularly housing issues and health and other things, youth development and so forth. And part of what I try to do is inspire people, despite the lead paint and the asthma epidemic and dealing with chronic medical conditions, to also be active in trying to change the political process, bringing their voices into the process, pressuring politicians, reforming the whole process. I think their role is structurally important. And so I just wanted to ask you about that. Thank you very much for being here.
One way I think to tie these two wonderful questions together, or these points together, is if we think about the way that slavery conditioned American capitalism, one of the ways it made a lasting impact was on the labor movement. One of the reasons that America never had a full-fledged, big, powerful labor movement like we saw in Britain or France was because these divisions between white and Black workers, and the racism that emerged from white unionists who kind of cut off their nose despite their face and weakened the labor movement by remaining segregationist. And I think that one of the lessons that comes out of the labor movement in general is that we have to reinsert a discussion of power when it comes to poverty reduction. And that might sound super obvious to this group, but man, I've had so many conversations about poverty where it's just kind of about outsmarting poverty. It's designing the programs a little better, making it technocratic. But we don't just need deeper investments. We really need different investments, different policies, and policies that cut poverty at the root, which often means we need to figure out how to increase worker power and increase choice for families in the brutal housing market, in the unrelenting financial exploitations of poor. That's about power. And I think that has to be sewn into our conversation. So I'm not an expert on Alaska's new voting system, but if it will increase power and representation and democratic voice, I think that's incredibly important. I was in Tennessee a few weeks ago and someone said, we're not a red state, we're a suppressed state. I thought it was a very powerful way to put it. And so I think that power conversation really matters. And with respect to who should be leading these movements and who should be out in front, I couldn't agree more with the doctor that folks that are closest to the problem or have real life experience should be the organic leaders of these movements. And I think that's what you're seeing, especially in the new labor movement and the new tenants' rights movement. And I've learned so much from folks that are on the forefront of these issues. And one of the things I've learned coming from, I've spent a lot of my adult life in a university setting, is a sense of beautiful, like swashbucklingness, an impatience for what is considered pragmatic or reasonable. And I think that that has really expanded my space of possibles. There's a little scene in the book about a tenants' rights movement fighting to buy back their apartments from a landlord that I wrote about in the Times a few years ago. And, it kind of came down to a head. There was a jury trial where everyone was either going to be evicted or they'd be homeowners. And we were waiting for the jury to decide. And this woman turns to me, Takara, who was a tenant leader, and she said, what's taking this jury so long is they're asking themselves, why do these tenants want this rundown building? And it's because people have forgotten how to dream. Mm. And I think that I was really convicted when she said that to me. I was like, man, have I forgotten how to dream? And I think that elevating the voices and experiences of people that have firsthand experiences with the sharp edge of poverty isn't just because it's a politically right thing to do. It's because you're going to expand your kind of imagination for what is possible and what should be asked for.
Thank you. Great questions. And thank you for that. Yeah. Actually, someone just wrote in the chat, down with reasonableness, up with dreams. Let me go to Len Breslow. It's a good follow-up on this. Len from Maryland, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, I hope I can remember it. I wrote, what government policies do you recommend to help the poor, as opposed to, I haven't read your book, so you've been talking more about not helping ourselves, that is the affluent, but government policies to help the poor.
Great.
What policies?
I think we need to do three things. First, we need to deepen our investments in fighting poverty. We need to expand affordable housing. We need to fight for higher wages, for example. And the pay for that is fair tax implementation. A study published a few years ago showed that if the top 1% of Americans just paid the taxes they owed, not paid more taxes, just paid what they owed, stop evading taxes so successfully, that we as a nation could raise $175 billion a year, which is almost enough to pull everyone above the official poverty line. We have the money, we can do this, but we also need different policies. We need to attack poverty in a radical way, which means we need to confront exploitation. So I think this is the second big thing we need to do. We need to back things that make organizing easy. Incredibly hard to organize places like Starbucks or Amazon today. The desire is there, the advocacy is there, but the returns aren't there. It shouldn't be this hard. So one of the things the book advocates for is secretarial bargaining. the idea of organizing entire sectors like the warehouse sector or food and hospitality all at one go. So we don't have to organize one Starbucks location or one Amazon warehouse at a time, build worker power. We also need to end housing exploitation. There's not a right way to do this, but there's a wrong way, which is the way we're doing it now. So I think in some markets, expanding homeownership opportunities for low-income families. In other markets, building out more public housing or social housing, housing that becomes permanently affordable. There are a lot of different investments we can make depending on if we live in rural Alabama or, on the west side of New York City. And then last, I think that we need to finally end our evil embrace of segregation. We need to stop just throwing resources over the wall. We have to tear down our walls. And we have to start fighting for broad, inclusive communities, because our concentrated affluence that we hoard behind these walls doesn't just create these social mobility machines. It also creates pockets of concentrated poverty and desperation outside of our walls. So integration is an incredibly important part of this. And the policy that I support most when it comes to this is inclusionary zoning laws, where we're replacing all this exclusionary zoning that's mapping the country on 75% of our residential land. It's illegal to build anything other than a single family detached home. We replace those laws with inclusionary zoning that the best of these laws make it illegal not to build affordable housing in communities and spread it out. And we can get into the weeds of all that, but I think that's a 1, 2, 3 punch about how we end poverty in America.
Thanks. Let's go to Jan Wooten. Jan, are you there? You have to unmute. Yeah, there you go. Go ahead and ask.
Matthew, thank you for this book. I've been thinking over and over and over about, how kind of the simple, kind of straightforward, rational ways that you articulate all the policies that we could put in place to kind of turn this thing around. We could do it tomorrow if there were the political will. And then I'm thinking you're talking to people on this call who have been experimenting with growing political will to do things that are not in our personal self-interest, but are in our community's interest, in our nation and the world's interest. And I was wondering how we think about that, how you mentioned a couple minutes ago, expanding the imagination for what's possible, coming together to do some things together that allow us to do things that maybe we don't like. I'm wondering how you think about that. I saw there have been a couple of questions about this in the chat, but how do you think about that side of the equation, Matthew?
I think that part of my job, and probably part of the job of any poverty abolitionist, isn't just to rap on the blackboard. We're not going to get very far like that. But I think our job is to probably make the movement enticing and irresistible. And I think that one way to do that is to start painting what a future could be without poverty in America. What would it look like? What would San Francisco look like without poverty in America? How would we feel knowing that no matter what happens to us, if we get in a car accident, we get divorced, we have a terrible medical diagnosis, no matter what happens to us, we're not going to descend into complete destitution. We're going to be okay. Our kids are going to be okay. What would it feel like to go out to a restaurant and know every single person in that restaurant is paid a fair wage? And we don't have to feel that ickiness that we feel, when we're embroiled in these systems of exploitation. And so I think that the end of poverty, ending our addiction to poverty, it's going to cost something, right? It's going to cost something. This isn't a everyone wins book. But I think that we pay a deep cost right now by this incredibly high tolerance of poverty, all this private opulence and public squalor. And I think that an America without poverty, it's a better America. It's a safer America. It's a more democratically engaged America. It's a freer America. It's an America that activates its full potential, right? That takes all those kids that, but for poverty, would have been engineers and scientists and diplomats and poets and priests, and takes those kids and unleashes their potential in a way that we're just not doing now. And so I think part of our job as storytellers is to try to paint that picture. There's this quote that I always butcher from this book called The Book of Stands, which is like, if you want your people to build a boat, you don't assemble the team and gather the wood, you make them long for the edge of the sea. And I think part of our job as poverty abolitionists is getting us to be like, wouldn't this be amazing if we got here? And you know what? I'm willing to pitch in a bit for that.
Thank you. Great question, Jan. Thanks, Matthew. Let's go to Jackie Fuller now from Virginia. Jackie, are you there?
All right. Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I'm at work, so that's why I had to mute it.
Go for it.
The questions I asked is just more in regards to the faith community because I'm in that space very often. And my concerns in those areas just kind of falls along the teachings in some communities. So I guess my overall my question would be, number one, how can faith-based organizations help serve the public with financial literacy to eradicate poverty? Because in those places, it's always about, the terminology about teaching people how to fish, that kind of thing. But at the same time, in some of these teachings, there's a stigma around poverty with the example of the poor will always be among us. And even that term or that phrase can be interpreted in different ways. So how can our faith communities also change the stigma around poverty? If you're able to answer those, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it makes me really angry. And I think it probably makes God really angry to hear that verse twisted in such a way, right? I mean, it's like you read the whole scripture and you get verses like, Isaiah 61:8, where he's like, I, the Lord, hate robbery. I hate injustice and love equity. There's just verse after verse after verse against exploitation, against unfair debt holding, against paying workers low wages, but that one sentence, which comes at this ridiculous time in the biblical teachings, right? Where Jesus is, it's the night before the cross, and Judas of all people is the one that raises this issue. And so I think that it's a, read as a whole, I think those of us that are in faith communities really have to push back against that. I just think that's a pretty shallow read of the scriptures. On what faith communities can do, one of the things that I would love to see faith communities get more involved in is the financial exploitation of the poor. We could teach a guy to fish, but like, if there's no other place to fish other than this really bad place, where's it going to go? So most folks that take out a payday loan, for example, take it out for a routine expense. You got to keep the lights on, pay the rent, things like that. It's not like their life got really bad. It's like their life's hard all the time. Poverty's one crisis after another. And sometimes you gotta do this. And often you're paying, 300, 400% interest on these little loans. You could take out 150 and end up paying 750 for it before the loan goes away. The church could totally undercut that. Faith communities can undercut that. They could offer very small interest loans, relational loans. They could offer sweat equity loans like we used to do with housing in the 70s. And I think that it's kind of a shame that often many faith communities that are often sitting on like giant amounts of capital, especially the Catholic Church that owns like most of New York City, for example, why we're not leveraging that capital on behalf of undercutting these more exploitive industries. I think that's one thing that I would love to see more faith communities get involved in.
Thank you. Let's go to Jen Bullock from Philadelphia. Jen, are you with us?
Yes, actually, and this is so helpful. And you kind of answered one of my questions, which is how can we read this book together, be really moved by your work and what you're sharing with us, and actually build a movement of poverty abolition and support one another. So I love the ideas you're sharing. I'm just wondering how we can support one another to really take this seriously.
Yeah, I feel like it's step by step, and I feel that it sometimes means embracing pretty awkward conversations. Like taxes. Like, think about how we talk about taxes. Like, taxes will roll around and everyone will be like, oh my God, taxes, And but what if the next time, like, your neighbor leans over the fence or runs into you on the stoop and they're like, oh my God, taxes. And we were like, I know, I can't believe I get the mortgage interest deduction for the home I own. And I can't believe we as a nation spend $190 billion on homeowner subsidies every year when there's like an eviction crisis and we have more than 1 million homeless public school kids. And so I'm donating, what I get for my mortgage deduction to my local eviction defense legal team. And I'm writing my congressperson saying, please wind this down. I don't need this. Now, that's an awkward conversation. That's a different conversation. It's an awkward conversation. But I think that's one way to change the common sense, right? To shift that overture. And I think that again, we've seen this with climate change. A lot of us believe in climate change. We have this value that we want to do something, but maybe we're not like propelled to do anything until like we drive down our street and we see that a neighbor put solar panels on. And then that shifts our social fact a little bit. Our neighbor bought the Prius or the electric car or the Bolt or whatever, and we say, all right, maybe I should take the plunge. So these kind of shifts in norms helps us act on things we already believe in a way. And so I think that's one way we can do it in our normal life. I also think that each of us, wherever we are positioned in life, have a little influence. Got a little influence somewhere. Like, I'm a professor, I got a little influence at the university. And so we could leverage that influence on the school board and our family and our community and the hospitals we teach at or our workplaces to ask things like, I should be asking, like, what are our landscapers paid? What is the endowment of my university vested in? And I think that this kind of start where you are call that, like, the gay liberation movement really, really took on, can be very effective with this movement too. And then if for those of you that want to really get involved in a movement, I mean, there's so many amazing anti-poverty organizations out in the world. And we started this website called endpovertyusa.org. So it's just endpovertyusa.org. And you can go on that website and you can find anti-poverty organizations working in all of your states and also at the federal level if you want to pitch in with your talents and your time and your resources.
Thanks, Matthew. And just to point out, we just threw that website in the chat for everybody to grab. Let's go to Leah Clifford.
Hi. So you kind of just touched on a little bit. My question is about how student loan forgiveness has sort of been having a roller coaster ride right now, especially for young people. It can mean a really big difference if the federal loan, student loans are forgiven. I know personally that it would help me tremendously. A lot of my friends are very scared they're going to have to move back in with their parents. It's the difference between making rent or not. I was just sort of hoping you could offer your opinion on what it's like seeing this go on within a higher education setting, and sort of what your opinions are on how it's sort of representative of how the United States views poverty, student loan forgiveness, loans in general.
Yeah, I haven't done a deep dive into the student loan debate. I think part of the reason why is, so about 50% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 have a college degree. A college degree does set you on a different path than a lot of other Americans. Most folks struggling in poverty aren't college educated. And so I think that I've been a little, I've been supportive of student loan forgiveness and think from just a straight up equity and racial disparity standpoint, it's a good idea. As a anti-poverty policy, it probably wouldn't make a huge difference. So that's just my cards on the table, right? This is kind of why I'm struggling with it. I think that one of the things that we should think about, though, with respect to building power and solidarity across different domains is, I think that there is a lot of opportunity to combine the thing you're feeling, right? Pinched, squeezed, like definitely not a part of the financially secure in America, which is what so many young people are feeling today, because, we've set the stacks against them. We've increased housing costs. The average homeowner age for first-time homeowners now is like 35, much older than it used to be. We've increased education savings and put that on young people. And then it's just like this kind of wishy-washy thing that's going on in government that can make it very uncertain. To think about that struggle and connecting that with the anti-poverty struggle and connecting that with struggles for labor fairness and tenant rights and healthcare, I think that gets me really excited. And I think that there's a lot of political mobilization today that's pretty narrow and targeted, right? There's a movement for certain kind of outcomes, certain kind of things that aren't really big tent. But I think for these kind of issues in economic justice, we have to figure out kind of a big tent politics, which I think can be challenging because not everyone in the tent believes the thing that we believe. Like we could have people in the tent that really want wages to be up and really want their guns, right? And that might challenge some of us. And so I think that there's a wonderful book called, I have it right here, The Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza, which kind of is about taking on this challenge and really, really wrestling with it. I'm sorry to kind of weave around your question, but I think it does open up bigger themes that we should consider for this conversation.
Thank you so much. And very important themes. I think a lot of us who are working in the political reform space deal a lot with that exact question of, wow, we're building a movement with very diverse Americans across the ideological spectrum, if you even believe there is such a thing at this moment. And what does it mean to come together to right the ship?
Yeah.
Wholly.
Right.
And what do we have to do to tolerate, to learn to live, to see the other in a different way? And obviously seeing the poor in a different way is very, very key. And you do such a wonderful job of helping so many people do that. I actually want to go back to Mary Fridley, who I think has a question related to what I just said. Mary, I think it is you who has a question.
Yes.
Okay.
The real Mary. No, get him off the screen. The fake one. Sorry. I think I sent Lou the link to get in, so I think that's why
I see. Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a delight to talk to you. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the subjectivity of poverty. Because your book, actually, one of the things I loved about and was very touched by is actually, I mean, it wasn't a big part of it, but you paid attention to just the incredible shaming of poor people.
Yeah.
I mean, that they're just treated like less than dirt. They're shamed everywhere they go. And I think that, to me, that's got to be an integral part of this fight, because not only, as I've learned from a number of the organizations like the All Stars Projects and others that I've worked with, poor people also feel that shame and often deny being poor. But the rest of us, I mean, I remember when I first became involved in working in poor communities and having that as a focus as a working class person who, our family was poor, but you never acknowledged that. I just thought, why do we have to focus on the poor? It's just ugly. Yeah. But I think a lot of us just don't want to see or be near it. And there's just so many judgments and anger and just disgust at poor people. So I don't think this is the be all and end all, but I personally believe if we're not willing to engage that as well, honestly, with each other, it's going to limit us. So I'm just curious about how you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important point because it because poverty remains so stigmatized in America, um, it's really hard to organize around, right? No one wants to claim
Yeah.
poverty. No one wants to march under that banner. And so the identity politics power that we see in other social movements eludes the anti-poverty movement for precisely this reason. And I think one of the takeaways from that challenge is we need to figure out a way to build in anti-shaming rituals and stories to our movements.
Mm.
So so my family's, we got foreclosed when I was growing up, before it was all the rage, before everyone was doing it. And I felt shame, right? I blamed dad. You know, I felt it in incredibly personal terms. And when the foreclosure crisis was happening, there was this wonderful community organization in Boston called City Life Vita Urbana. And one of the guys who was part of City Life was this guy named Dave Grossman, who cancer took much too early. But he ran a little housing clinic out of Harvard Law. And he'd send students down to the courthouse every week to look at the foreclosure listings, publicly listed. And they'd take them off the wall, they'd copy them down, they'd knock on doors. They'd say, hey, are you the Johnson family? They're like, yes, we see you're getting foreclosed. We're having a meeting, Thursday night. Come to our meeting. We're addressing this problem. And if the Johnson family showed up, this is what they do. They would bring them in front, like you're a church, like an altar call. They'd say, come on, we got some new folks here. So they bring in front of a room like 80 folks or something. And they'd say, this is the Johnson family. They're getting foreclosed. And then they'd say, Johnson family, will you fight? And if they said yes, the whole room would be like, we'll fight with you. It was like this beautiful anti-shaming thing. So it was like, it's not on you guys, like we're in this. And so I think that there was a lot of wisdom in that ritual where you're basically confronting that shame from the jump, right? From the step one, and then you can organize after that. And so I think that a lot of us in the anti-poverty movement, we jump to the technocratic stuff. We're fluent in policy, even politics. But this level, the emotional stuff, I think we need to take it more seriously. You're right, Mary.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mary. We are actually over time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your time today and helping us to take a deeper look. And I'm so glad we ended with that question from Mary. And we need to build anti-shaming rituals, and we have a lot of work to do there for sure.
Yeah. Well, this is really wonderful for me. Thank you all so much for the opportunity and for engaging these ideas so critically and so enthusiastically. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep talking. Let me just end with a couple of quick announcements, everybody. We're taking applications now for independent voting spokesperson training, which will be October 16th at 6:30 p.m. This is Independent Voting's flagship program. It's designed to give independents tools to talk about why you're an independent, to go up against the media's portrait of us as hidden partisans. It's part educational, part performance. You have an opportunity to talk with Jackie Salit, the president of Independent Voting, and to work with top-notch performance trainers. We've gotten rave reviews from folks. Many of you in the chat have taken the program. Spaces are limited. So if you're interested, you can submit your application or send an email to Gwen Mandel, the Director of National Outreach, and the links will be in the chat. Also, the People invite you to sign up for their weekly newsletter to stay abreast of the wonderful ongoing work they're doing to revitalize our democracy. And the link to sign up is in our chat. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Politics for the People blog. You can check out all of our latest updates, read the dialogues we're having about the books that we're reading. We're going to announce our fall selection soon. And the recording of today's conversation will be posted on the blog in the next several days. I want to encourage everyone to share that. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Matthew, for your wonderful work. We look forward to lots of next steps, and happy summer reading, everybody.